I used to believe that the worst surprises came with bad news, unpaid bills, or a phone call in the middle of the night. I was wrong. The biggest surprise of my life arrived in complete silence, wearing a polite smile behind a bank counter, and it began with 4 words I will never forget. "Sir, please sit down. My name is Jeffrey Foster." And until that Tuesday morning, there was nothing unusual about my life except how ordinary it had become. Jonathan's mother and I had separated several years earlier, and because she now lived several states away, most of the daily responsibility for raising him had fallen to me. I was 38 years old, worked full-time as a heating and air conditioning maintenance technician for a public middle school outside Gainesville, Florida, and spent most of my energy trying to make sure my 12-year-old son, Jonathan, never realized how carefully I calculated every dollar we spent. We weren't starving, and we weren't homeless, but life had become one long exercise in making things stretch just a little farther than they were designed to. My old pickup had over 200,000 miles on it. My work boots had been resold twice. The apartment we were about to rent wasn't fancy, but it was in a safer neighborhood with a better school district, and after months of searching, I had finally convinced the landlord to hold it for us if I could deliver the security deposit by the end of the week. That was why I needed exactly $2,000 from my savings account that morning. It wasn't vacation money. It wasn't spending money. It was the difference between Jonathan starting 7th grade in a neighborhood where I could let him ride his bike without worrying every minute and staying somewhere that never quite felt like home. Jonathan had left for summer basketball practice an hour earlier after reminding me, with the confidence only a 12-year-old could have, that everything would work out because, in his words, "Dad, stuff always works out eventually." I smiled when he said it, even though I wasn't nearly as certain. Kids have a remarkable ability to believe tomorrow will somehow fix today. Adults know tomorrow usually comes with another bill. Before heading to the bank, I stopped at the school to finish replacing a faulty thermostat in the library. The building was quiet since classes were out for summer, and I appreciated the silence. I liked solving problems that had straightforward answers. If an air conditioner stopped working, there was always a reason. A broken capacitor, a worn motor, a clogged filter. Life outside mechanical systems wasn't nearly as cooperative. By 10:30, I climbed back into my truck, grabbed the envelope containing my rental paperwork, and drove across town. The bank wasn't crowded when I walked inside. A retired couple stood near the customer service desk discussing certificates of deposit. A young mother helped her little daughter count coins into a machine. Someone laughed softly near the entrance. Nothing felt unusual. The air conditioning hummed steadily overhead, and soft instrumental music floated through the lobby. It looked like every other Tuesday morning in every other American bank. I pulled a numbered ticket even though only 2 people were ahead of me. While I waited, I checked the apartment listing on my phone one more time, almost afraid it would disappear if I looked away too long. Jonathan had already picked which bedroom he wanted. He liked that the window overlooked a small baseball field. He said he could hear kids playing after school. That mattered more to him than having a bigger room. "Number 43, the speaker announced. I slipped my phone into my pocket and walked toward the next available teller. Her name tag read Kimberly. She looked to be somewhere in her early 40s with neatly tied brown hair and the kind of professional smile that probably greeted hundreds of customers every day. "Good morning," she said warmly. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to withdraw $2,000 from my savings account." "Of course." She asked for my debit card and driver's license, verified my information, and began typing. I rested one hand on the counter while glancing absent-mindedly toward the lobby windows where sunlight reflected off parked cars. I was already thinking about calling the landlord. Afterward, then something changed. It was almost too subtle to notice. Kimberly's fingers stopped moving. The polite smile disappeared. Her eyes remained fixed on her monitor a fraction of a second longer than seemed normal. She blinked once, then twice. She quietly pressed a key beneath the counter before looking back at me with an expression I couldn't immediately understand. It wasn't fear exactly. It wasn't confusion either. It looked more like someone trying very hard not to alarm another person. "Mr. Foster," she said softly, lowering her voice until I almost had to lean forward to hear her. "Would you mind taking a seat for just a moment?" I frowned. "Is there a problem with my account?" She hesitated for barely a heartbeat before answering. "Please, just have a seat. It'll only be a minute." My stomach tightened instantly. Every terrible possibility rushed into my head at once. Had someone emptied my account? Was there identity theft? Had a payment been reversed? Had I somehow made a mistake I couldn't afford to make? I looked around the lobby. Nobody else seemed concerned. The retired couple continued chatting. The little girl laughed as more coins dropped into the counting machine. Everything appeared perfectly normal except the woman standing in front of me. Then I noticed something else. Without drawing attention to himself, the uniformed security guard near the entrance quietly stepped away from the front doors and positioned himself several feet closer to the lobby. He wasn't staring at me, but he wasn't ignoring me either. Kimberly gave me another reassuring smile, although it looked noticeably forced this time. "Please trust me," she whispered, so quietly I almost wondered if I'd imagined it. "Sir, sit down. Don't leave." Before I could ask another question, a man wearing a navy suit stepped quickly out of an office near the back of the bank, looked directly at me, and said in an unusually calm voice, "Mr. Foster, before we complete your withdrawal, there's someone here who needs to speak with you." I stood there for a second, unsure whether I had somehow become the center of a misunderstanding. The man in the navy suit stopped a respectful distance away and offered a calm smile that looked practiced rather than friendly. "Mr. Foster," he said, "my name is Luis Morales. I am the branch manager. Would you mind stepping into my office for a few minutes?" I looked back at Kimberly. She gave me the smallest nod, almost as if she were encouraging me to cooperate. "Is something wrong with my account?" I asked again. Luis answered carefully, "Your account is secure. We simply need to discuss something privately before processing today's transaction." His wording only made my imagination work harder. If my account was secure, then why was I being taken into an office? I briefly considered refusing, but there was nothing threatening about anyone's behavior. No one had raised a voice. No one had accused me of anything. The security guard had quietly returned to his original position near the entrance, making me realize he probably had not been reacting to me at all. I followed Luis through a short hallway into a modest office with framed community awards on the wall and a window overlooking the parking lot. He closed the door but deliberately left it slightly open, a small gesture that somehow made the room feel less intimidating. He invited me to sit, while another employee placed 2 bottles of water on the desk before quietly leaving. Luis folded his hands together. "First, I want to assure you that you are not in any legal trouble. Nothing about this meeting concerns criminal activity or suspicious conduct on your part." I let out a slow breath I had not realized I had been holding. At least that possibility was gone. "Then what is this about?" He turned his computer monitor slightly so that I could see the screen. "When Kimberly accessed your account to prepare your withdrawal, our system displayed a fraud prevention alert requiring us to verify your identity and confirm that you were aware of a large trust transfer posted earlier this morning." Management review for what? Luis clicked through several verification screens. "Because your account balance changed significantly earlier this morning." I frowned. That cannot be right. He looked back at me. "Have you checked your online banking today?" "No. I came straight here after finishing a maintenance call at the school." "Would you happen to know approximately how much is currently in your savings account?" "Just over $2,300 before I withdrew anything." Luis nodded as though that matched what he expected me to say. Then he slowly turned the monitor the rest of the way toward me. My eyes went directly to the available balance. At first I thought I had misread the commas. Then I blinked and leaned closer. $1,812,436.18. I actually laughed because it was so absurd. "That is not my account." Luis remained completely serious. "We have confirmed your identity multiple times. There has to be a mistake. We considered that immediately." He clicked another screen showing the transaction history. The massive deposit had posted less than 2 hours earlier through a trust administration transfer from a nationally recognized financial institution. Every field appeared complete. Every verification box showed approved. "This is impossible," I said. "Somebody entered the wrong account number." Luis shook his head. "Our operations department has already contacted the originating institution. They confirmed the transfer information matches your name, your social security number, your date of birth, and your account." My heart started beating faster again. "Then reverse it before somebody loses almost $2 million. Luis surprised me by smiling for the first time. That was our first recommendation as well. Unfortunately, the originating institution informed us there was nothing to reverse because the transfer was intentional. I stared at him without speaking. He continued, "Mr. Foster, I understand this is overwhelming. We have dealt with inheritance transfers before, but it is uncommon for someone to learn about them in quite this way." The word inheritance caught my attention immediately. "You have the wrong family. There is nobody in my family with that kind of money." Luis did not argue. Instead, he opened a printed document that had already been waiting inside a folder. "Perhaps you should look at the sender information." He slid the page across the desk. I expected to see the name of some distant uncle I had never met, or perhaps an attorney representing an estate. Instead, my eyes locked onto a name I had not spoken aloud in decades. Sherry Willis Foster. My mother. Every sound in the room seemed to disappear. I read the name again, convinced I had imagined it. Sherry Willis Foster. I slowly pushed the paper back toward Luis. "That is not possible." He waited quietly. "My mother died when I was a child." Luis chose his next words with remarkable care. "I am sorry, Mr. Foster, but according to every document we have received today, the individual who authorized this trust distribution is alive." I shook my head almost immediately. "No. My father told me she died after leaving us." Even saying the sentence out loud made something feel strangely uncertain. Luis did not challenge what I had been told. He simply reached into the folder and removed another sealed envelope. "The trust administrator anticipated you might have questions. They asked that we not release any funds until you had an opportunity to speak with their legal representative." I looked at the unopened envelope resting on the desk between us. "Where is this representative?" Luis checked his watch. "He is on his way from another office across town. He should arrive within 15 minutes. I leaned back in my chair, trying to connect facts that refused to fit together. My mother had died. That had never been a question in my life. My father had said it. My grandparents had never corrected him. No birthday cards had ever arrived. No phone calls. No visits. Nothing. 30 years of silence could not suddenly become one banking error. Luis excused himself to give me a few minutes alone. I stood and walked toward the office window, watching customers come and go as if nothing unusual were happening. Somewhere across town, Jonathan was probably finishing basketball drills, completely unaware that his father was standing inside a bank trying to understand how a woman he believed had been dead for 3 decades had apparently just transferred nearly $2 million into his account. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Luis opened the door again, but this time he was not alone. An older man carrying a worn leather briefcase stepped into the office, looked directly at me with unmistakable recognition, and quietly said, "Mr. Foster, I have been hoping to meet you for more than 20 years. Your mother asked me to tell you that she never stopped looking for you." I could not answer him. The words settled over the room with a weight that made everything else disappear. The older man set his leather briefcase on the conference table before extending his hand. "My name is Noel Rodriguez," he said gently. "I have served as Sherry Foster's attorney for the past 21 years. I looked at his hand for a moment before shaking it automatically. My mind was still trapped on a single sentence. "She never stopped looking for you." "You have the wrong person," I finally managed to say. "My father told me my mother died when I was 8. Noel did not look surprised. In fact, he looked as though he had expected that exact response. He slowly sat down across from me. "Mr. Foster, I know today has been overwhelming. I also know that what I am about to tell you directly contradicts what you have believed for most of your life. I am not asking you to accept any of it immediately. I am only asking you to listen." Luis quietly excused himself, closing the office door behind him to give us privacy. Noel opened his briefcase and removed a thick file secured with colored tabs. Every page looked carefully organized. There were court records, certified copies, correspondence logs, and legal documents that appeared decades old. Nothing about the file looked hurried or improvised. "Your mother is alive," Noel said calmly. "She lives at an assisted living community outside Tallahassee, and she authorized today's trust distribution herself." I shook my head again. "No, that cannot be true. I understand why you feel that way." He slid a certified document toward me. "This is her current identification. This is the trust agreement. These are notarized signatures completed less than 3 weeks ago." Everything appeared authentic. The signatures were witnessed. The documents carried official seals. I still could not force myself to believe them. Why would she disappear for 30 years? I asked. Noelle leaned back slightly before answering. She did not disappear voluntarily. That sentence caught my attention immediately. He continued carefully. Your parents divorced after several years of increasingly difficult legal disputes. The court granted your father primary custody while your mother received scheduled visitation. She exercised every visit during the first several months. I frowned. None of that matched the story I had grown up hearing. According to my father, my mother had simply decided she wanted a different life. Noelle opened another section of the file. Then something changed. He placed several photocopies of returned envelopes on the table. Bright postal markings covered each one. Returned to sender. Unable to forward. Recipient no longer at this address. Your mother mailed birthday cards every year, Noelle explained. Every one of them came back. I picked up one of the copies. The envelope was addressed to me in careful handwriting. Jeffrey Foster. The return date showed I had been 9 years old. Another envelope was dated when I turned 10, then 11, then 12. My throat suddenly felt dry. She also attempted to call, Noelle continued. The phone numbers she had were disconnected. When she contacted the school district, she was informed there were no records available under the address she had been given. My breathing slowed as pieces that had never seemed important began quietly rearranging themselves inside my memory. We had moved several times after the divorce. My father had always described each move as a fresh start because of work opportunities. I had never questioned it. Noelle studied my expression before speaking again. Your mother hired private investigators more than once over the years. None of them could legally access certain records without current addresses or updated custody information. Every search eventually reached a dead end. I looked at him. Why did she not go back to court? She tried. He opened another folder containing faded court filings. Several petitions were filed. Some were dismissed because your location could not be confirmed. Others became financially impossible to continue after your mother's business failed during a recession. I stared silently at the paperwork. For the first time in my life, I was looking at official documents instead of family stories. Facts felt very different from memories. Noelle reached into the file and carefully removed a small photograph protected inside a plastic sleeve. She asked me to give you this if today's meeting happened. I accepted it with trembling fingers. The photograph showed a woman in her late 20s sitting on a park bench, smiling while holding a birthday cake with a single blue candle shaped like the number 9. Beside the cake was a wrapped baseball glove. There was no child in the picture. Only an empty place on the bench where someone had clearly been expected to sit. On the back, written in blue ink, were 7 simple words. Waiting for Jeffrey. Maybe next year. I closed my eyes for a moment. I remembered wanting a baseball glove when I was 9. My father had told me money was too tight that year. Noelle quietly let the silence remain between us. Mr. Foster, he finally said, your mother kept every birthday gift she was never able to deliver. She never threw them away. I slowly opened my eyes again. If everything you are saying is true, why send the money now? Noelle nodded as though he had been waiting for that question. Your mother postponed the transfer several times because she wanted to be certain she would still be alive when you learned the truth. She never wanted money to arrive before she had the chance to look you in the eyes. As her health began declining more rapidly, she realized she could not wait any longer. That is why she authorized the distribution now. She believed time had become more valuable than money. Before I could ask what he meant, his cell phone vibrated softly on the table. He glanced at the screen, then looked back at me with an expression that immediately tightened my chest. I was hoping this call would come later, he said quietly. He answered, listened for only a few seconds, then thanked the caller before ending the conversation. When he looked back at me, his voice had grown noticeably softer. Mr. Foster, your mother has asked whether you would be willing to see something before deciding whether to meet her. He reached into his briefcase one final time and placed a weathered cardboard box on the table. Across the top, written in the same careful handwriting I had seen on the envelopes, were 4 words that made my heart stop all over again. For my son, Jeffrey. I stared at the box for several long seconds before reaching toward it. The cardboard had softened with age, and the edges were worn smooth as though it had been moved from one shelf to another countless times over the years. A small piece of faded blue tape still held the lid closed. I could not imagine anyone protecting an ordinary box with that much care for more than 3 decades unless what was inside mattered more than almost anything else. Noelle did not rush me. He simply folded his hands and waited. She packed that herself, he said quietly. She updated it many times over the years, but she never replaced the box. She said she wanted you to see that some things grow older without losing their purpose. I slowly peeled away the tape and lifted the lid. The first thing I noticed was not a letter. It was the smell of old paper, cedar, and time. Inside were neatly organized envelopes tied together with different colored ribbons. One bundle was labeled birthdays. Another read Christmas. A third simply said important days. Beneath them rested a stack of photographs, several small wrapped gifts, and a worn blue notebook. Everything had been arranged with remarkable care. I picked up the first envelope from the birthday bundle. The front read, "To Jeffrey on your 9th birthday." My hands shook slightly as I unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting matched the note on the photograph I had seen only minutes earlier. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I hope someone remembered that you wanted a baseball glove this year. I still picture the way your face lit up when we played catch in the backyard. I will keep trying until I find you again. If you ever read this, please know that missing you has never become easier." I stopped reading. My throat tightened so suddenly that I could not continue for several moments. Noelle quietly slid a box of tissues across the table without saying a word. I opened another letter. Then another. Every birthday had one. Every Christmas had one. Every school year seemed to begin with another note wishing me confidence, happiness, and good teachers. None of them mentioned anger toward my father. None of them blamed anyone. They all focused on me. They all ended almost exactly the same way. "I love you. I'm still looking for you." Those simple sentences carried more weight than anything else in the room. After reading several letters, I noticed something unusual. The details inside became increasingly accurate as the years passed. One letter congratulated me on making the honor roll. Another mentioned my first part-time job. Another hoped my high school graduation ceremony had gone well despite the rain. I looked up from the paper. How could she know these things? Noelle nodded slowly. "That is the question she expected you to ask." He reached into the box and removed the blue notebook. Inside was a carefully dated record covering nearly 7 years. Each page listed small updates about my life. August. Jonathan started kindergarten. December. Jeffrey helped repair the school gym furnace before the winter fundraiser. June. Jonathan completed 1st grade. September. Jeffrey continued working in maintenance for the school district. March. Jonathan joined his first basketball team. The pages continued with dozens of similar observations collected over the years. Every entry was brief, but surprisingly accurate. My pulse quickened again. "Who wrote this?" I asked. Noelle gently closed the notebook. "Someone who honored a promise." "Who?" "I cannot answer that yet." His response frustrated me immediately. "You have shown me proof that my mother knew details nobody should have known. And now you are telling me someone was secretly watching my life." Noelle shook his head. "Watching is not the right word. Looking out for is much closer to the truth." I leaned back, trying to understand what he meant. There had been no mysterious stranger in my life. No anonymous letters. No unexplained phone calls. My life had been completely ordinary. Or at least I had believed it was. Noelle continued. "Your mother never asked anyone to interfere with your decisions. She only wanted reassurance that you were safe and that you were becoming the kind man she always believed you would be." I looked back at the notebook. The final entry had been written only 3 weeks earlier. "Jeffrey continues to put Jonathan first. He is raising a thoughtful young man. He still smiles more when talking about his son than himself." I felt something inside me shift. Whoever had written that had not simply gathered public information. They had actually known me. They had observed enough to understand what mattered in my life. I suddenly began replaying years of ordinary conversations in my head. Neighbors, teachers, parents from Jonathan's basketball team, co-workers, church volunteers, the elderly cashier at the grocery store who always remembered Jonathan's favorite candy, the crossing guard near the school. Any one of them could have shared harmless updates without my ever noticing. "Who is it?" I asked again, more quietly this time. Noelle smiled with genuine sympathy. "If I answer now, you will spend the rest of today thinking about that person instead of your mother. She wanted this day to belong to the relationship the two of you lost." I understood his point, but curiosity refused to disappear. I carefully returned every letter to its proper place before lifting one of the small wrapped gifts from the bottom of the box. The paper had yellowed with age, but the gift tag remained perfectly readable. It said, "For your 12th birthday." I looked at Noelle for permission. He nodded. Inside was a brand new pocket compass, still resting in its original case. Attached was another note. No matter where life takes you, I hope you always find your way home. I closed the case without speaking. I had owned an almost identical compass when I was 12. My father had told me he found it at a yard sale. For the first time all day, another possibility entered my mind. Maybe some of the things I remembered had not happened the way I had always believed. As if he could read my thoughts, Noel quietly reached into the very bottom of the box and removed a sealed envelope that was noticeably newer than everything else. Across the front, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Please read this only after you discover who never stopped helping me find you." I kept looking at the sealed envelope while Noel gently placed it back into the box instead of handing it to me. "Not yet," he said. "Your mother was very specific about the order." I nodded, although every instinct told me to open it immediately. After everything I had learned that morning, waiting even another hour felt impossible. Noel carefully closed the lid of the box and rested both hands on top of it. "There is one part of this story that cannot be understood through letters alone," he said. "It involves another person, someone your mother trusted deeply for many years." I leaned forward. "The person who wrote those updates?" "Yes." "Did this person know me?" Noel smiled faintly. "Better than you might imagine." My mind immediately began sorting through faces from different stages of my life. Former teachers, coaches, neighbors, co-workers, parents from Jonathan's school. None of them seemed to fit. "Did I ever work with this person?" I asked. "No." "Are they family?" "No." "A friend of my mother's?" Noel nodded. "Originally, yes. But over the years, something changed. They came to care about your well-being as if you were someone from their own family." He paused before continuing. "Your mother met this person again by chance nearly 20 years ago. At first, she only wanted occasional reassurance that you were safe. She made one condition perfectly clear. There would be no interference in your life. No secret messages. No attempts to manipulate your decisions. She only wanted to know whether you were healthy, whether you seemed happy, and whether you had built the kind of life she had always hoped for you." I looked back at the notebook filled with dated observations. "Some of these entries are very personal." Noel nodded. "Only because ordinary life often reveals extraordinary character." He opened the notebook again and pointed to one entry from several years earlier. "Jeffrey stayed after work to repair the furnace in the school gym before a community fundraiser, even though no overtime was approved." Another entry read, "Jeffrey spent Saturday teaching Jonathan how to replace bicycle brakes instead of buying a new bicycle." Then another, "Jeffrey quietly paid for groceries when an elderly customer realized she had forgotten her wallet." I frowned. "I never told anyone about some of these things." "You did not have to," Noel replied. "Acts of kindness usually have witnesses." Many of those observations came from teachers, parents, neighbors, and community volunteers who never realized they were simply reassuring a worried mother that her son was doing well. That answer lingered with me. I had never considered that simple moments most people quickly forgot might become lasting memories for someone else. Noel closed the notebook once more. "Your mother treasured every update because they answered the question that mattered most to her." Which was? He looked directly at me. "Did my son become a good man?" I lowered my eyes to the table. Of all the questions I expected, that one somehow affected me the most. She had not asked whether I became wealthy. She had not asked about promotions, awards, or success. She only wanted to know whether I had become a decent human being. The room remained quiet for several moments before Noel reached into his briefcase and removed another photograph. It showed my son Jonathan climbing onto a yellow school bus with a backpack nearly as large as he was. I recognized the picture immediately. It had been taken on Jonathan's first day of kindergarten. "Who took this?" I asked. Noel smiled. "Not your mother. She never wanted photographs taken secretly. This one was sent to her with your permission, although you never realized you had given it." I stared at him in confusion. "I never gave anyone permission to send my mother pictures." "Indirectly, you did. The individual helping your mother asked whether they could take a picture of Jonathan on his first day of school because they enjoyed documenting children growing up. You happily agreed." I searched my memory. Countless first-day photographs had been taken by relatives, teachers, and neighbors. Nothing unusual had happened that morning. Then another memory surfaced. An older gentleman had smiled warmly and asked if he could snap one more picture because Jonathan looked so proud carrying his new backpack. I had thanked him without thinking twice. The memory disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived, but it left behind an uneasy feeling that I had overlooked something important for years. Noelle noticed the change in my expression. You are beginning to remember. Maybe. That is enough for now. I rubbed my forehead. Why keep this person's identity secret? Because your mother wanted your first thoughts to belong to her. Once you know who they are, many ordinary memories will suddenly feel completely different. She hoped you would first understand why she searched, why she waited, and why she never gave up. My phone suddenly vibrated in my pocket. The screen showed Jonathan's name. I answered immediately. Hey, buddy. Dad, practice ended early. Coach Vega said we did great today. Are you almost done at the bank? I looked across the room at the cardboard box sitting beside me. I am still here. Something unexpected came up. Everything okay? I smiled despite everything. I think so. It is just taking longer than I planned. Do not forget we were going to look at that apartment this afternoon. I have not forgotten. Good, Jonathan said cheerfully. I already measured my desk. I think it will fit by the window. After we hung up, I realized how much had changed in only 1 hour. I had walked into the bank worried about whether I could afford a security deposit. Now I was questioning almost every story I had ever believed about my childhood. Noelle glanced at his watch before standing. There is someone I would like you to meet today, if you are willing. The person who helped my mother? He nodded. Yes. They asked for nothing in return all these years. In fact, they nearly refused to let your mother reveal their identity at all. Where are they? Noelle picked up the cardboard box and smiled gently. You have already seen them this week. You simply have never had a reason to look twice. I left the bank carrying the cardboard box far more carefully than I had carried the envelope containing the apartment paperwork only a few hours earlier. Noelle drove separately and asked me to follow him across town. During the drive, my thoughts drifted between the road ahead and the memories behind me. Every familiar face I passed suddenly seemed capable of hiding an extraordinary story. I found myself wondering how many people quietly shaped someone else's life without ever expecting recognition. After nearly 20 minutes, Noelle turned into the parking lot of Jonathan's middle school. I parked beside him and stepped out, confused. Why are we here? I asked. School is out for the summer. Noelle smiled. Not everyone who works here leaves when students do. We walked toward the athletic entrance where several maintenance trucks were parked. Coaches were organizing equipment for a youth basketball camp that would begin the following week. Parents came and went. Volunteers carried folding tables across the gym floor, and everything looked comfortably ordinary. Noelle paused before we entered the building. Remember what I told you, he said quietly. This person promised never to interfere with your life. They simply stayed close enough to know whether you were all right. We stepped inside the gymnasium. At first I noticed nothing unusual. Then I saw a familiar yellow school bus parked outside through the open loading doors. A man wearing a light blue transportation department shirt climbed down from the driver's seat carrying a clipboard. His gray hair was neatly combed beneath a baseball cap, and his easy smile appeared exactly as it had every weekday morning for years. Willie Mitchell, Jonathan's bus driver. I stopped walking. No, I whispered. It cannot be him. Noelle nodded gently. It is. Willie looked up, recognized Noelle immediately, then noticed me standing beside him. His warm smile faded into something far more emotional. He slowly removed his cap and held it against his chest before walking toward us. Hello, Jeffrey, he said softly. I have wondered for a long time what this day might feel like. I stared at him, searching his face for some clue. I had somehow missed all these years. Willie had driven Jonathan's route since kindergarten. He remembered birthdays. He asked about basketball tournaments. He always greeted every child by name. I had simply assumed he was one of those naturally kind people who enjoyed working with children. You knew my mother? I asked. Willie nodded. We graduated from high school together. He smiled faintly at the memory. She was 1 year behind me, but everyone knew Sherry because she volunteered for almost everything. He looked toward the buses lined up outside before continuing. Many years later, we ran into each other at a community fundraiser in Tallahassee. She asked if I had ever heard of a man named Jeffrey Foster. I had not. More than a decade later, by complete coincidence, I accepted a position in this school district. During my first week driving routes, I saw your last name listed on an emergency contact form for a new student named Jonathan Foster. My heart began beating faster. Willie continued carefully. I realized your son attended the school where I had just started working. I never expected that. So you recognized me? I asked. Not from the name alone. Willie admitted. You were a little boy the last time I saw you. But after meeting you during the first parent orientation, I knew without any doubt. He smiled gently. You have your mother's eyes. I looked away for a moment, trying to absorb everything he was saying. Willie leaned against the side of the bus. I called Sherry that evening. She cried so hard she could barely finish the conversation. I closed my eyes. For years I had shaken this man's hand during school events, thanked him for watching over Jonathan during field trips, and chatted with him while waiting for basketball practices to end. All the while, he had quietly carried a promise I had never known existed. Why did you never tell me? I asked. Willie answered without hesitation. Because your mother asked me not to unless the day finally came when she could tell you herself. She never wanted your life disrupted because of her pain. She only wanted to know that you were safe. Noelle quietly stepped several feet away, giving us privacy. Willie looked at me with genuine affection. Do you remember the winter your truck would not start before work? I nodded. A neighbor gave me a jump. Willie smiled. The neighbor happened to call me because he knew I worked with batteries on the buses. I drove over before sunrise and replaced one of the damaged cables while you were inside getting Jonathan ready. I asked him not to mention it. Another memory surfaced. The repair bill had been much lower than the mechanic expected. At the time, I had considered myself unusually lucky. Willie continued before I could respond. Do you remember when Jonathan lost his backpack after the science fair? Of course. We found it the next morning. I found it after everyone left. His project was still inside. I knew how much work he had put into it. So I drove back to the school late that evening and locked it inside my office instead of leaving it in the lost and found. Small memories I had forgotten for years suddenly connected into a completely different picture. None of those moments had been dramatic. None had changed the direction of my life. Yet together they formed something far more meaningful. Someone had quietly watched over my family without expecting thanks or recognition. Willie reached into his shirt pocket and carefully removed a folded piece of paper. Sherry asked me to keep this with me until the day we finally met like this. He handed it to me. It was a handwritten note only a few sentences long. If Jeffrey ever learns the truth, please remind him that kindness is not measured by grand gestures. Sometimes the greatest gift is simply making sure someone never feels alone. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my wallet. Willie smiled through eyes that had grown noticeably wetter. She always believed you would understand those words one day. Before I could answer, Noelle walked back toward us with his phone in his hand. His expression had changed completely. He looked from Willie to me before speaking in a voice so quiet that it immediately made my stomach tighten. Jeffrey, he said, the care facility just called. Your mother's health has declined much faster than her doctors expected. If you want the chance to meet her while she is still awake, we need to leave right now. I drove north toward Tallahassee with Noelle following behind me while Willie remained standing beside the school bus, quietly raising one hand as we pulled away. The drive that usually felt routine seemed strangely suspended outside of time. Traffic moved normally, people stopped for gas, families walked into restaurants, and yet my entire understanding of my own life had shifted before lunchtime. Every few miles I glanced at the cardboard box resting on the passenger seat. It no longer felt like a collection of old letters. It felt like 30 years of conversations waiting to happen all at once. About halfway through the drive, my phone rang again. This time it was Jonathan. Dad, are we still seeing the apartment today? He asked. I took a slow breath before answering. We are, but something important came up first. He immediately sensed the seriousness in my voice. Is everything okay? I hope it will be. There is someone I need to meet today. There was a brief pause before he quietly asked, Do you want me to come with you? The question caught me off guard. I had not planned on bringing Jonathan into something this emotional so suddenly. It might be a long afternoon, I said carefully. I do not mind, he replied. Coach Vega's wife said she can keep the gym open until you get here if I need to wait. But if this is important to you, maybe I should be there. His maturity reminded me so much of the entries I had just read in the blue notebook. I told him I would pick him up on the way, and 20 minutes later he climbed into the truck carrying his basketball bag. He looked at me for only a second before asking, Did something happen at the bank? I smiled faintly, more than I ever thought possible. As we continued driving, I explained only what I felt he was ready to hear. I told him that my mother, the grandmother he had never met, was alive and that I had learned the truth only a few hours earlier. Jonathan did not interrupt. He simply listened, occasionally looking out the window while quietly processing each sentence. When I finished, he asked the one question I had been asking myself all day. So she wanted to find you the whole time? Yes. Then she must have loved you a lot. His simple observation carried more wisdom than many adults manage in a lifetime. I nodded because I could no longer trust my voice. When we arrived at the assisted living community, Noelle was already waiting near the entrance. The building overlooked a small pond surrounded by flowering trees and walking paths where several residents sat enjoying the afternoon sunshine. It was peaceful in a way that made the day feel even more surreal. Inside, a nurse greeted Noelle warmly before looking at me with gentle understanding. She has been awake on and off, the nurse explained. She has asked several times whether you were on your way. Hearing that sentence made the remaining distance to her room feel much longer than the hallway actually was. We stopped outside a partially open door. Noelle quietly touched my shoulder. Take whatever time you need. There is no right way to do this. I looked at Jonathan. You do not have to come in if you would rather wait. He shook his head immediately. I think she has waited long enough. Together we stepped into the room. A woman with silver hair rested against several pillows near the window. She looked smaller than I had imagined after building an image of her through decades of unanswered questions. A knitted blanket covered her lap, and a pair of reading glasses rested beside an open book on the bedside table. Family photographs lined the windowsill, but I noticed that every picture of me came from different stages of my life without my ever realizing they had existed. She slowly turned her head toward the doorway. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. Then tears filled her eyes before she smiled in a way that somehow felt instantly familiar. Jeffrey, she whispered. I had imagined this moment countless different ways during the drive. I thought I might demand explanations. I thought I might ask why everything had happened. Instead, the only word that came out was the one I had not spoken in more than 30 years. Mom. She covered her mouth as tears rolled gently down her cheeks. I crossed the room and took her hand. It felt warm but fragile. She held mine with surprising strength. I was afraid I would run out of time, she said softly. I almost did. I shook my head. Noelle showed me the letters. She smiled through her tears. I wrote more than I mailed. I know. Did you read the birthday ones? Yes. She laughed quietly. I always imagined you reading them when you were much older than 9. We both smiled at the same time, and for the first time that day, the silence between us no longer felt painful. She looked toward Jonathan, who had remained respectfully near the door. And this handsome young man must be Jonathan. Jonathan stepped closer. Hello, Grandma. The room became completely still. Sherry closed her eyes for a moment as fresh tears slipped down her face. I have dreamed of hearing that word for so many years, she whispered. Jonathan gently took her other hand. Dad talks about fixing things all the time, he said with the innocent sincerity only a 12-year-old could have. Maybe families can be fixed too. Sherry smiled warmly. I believe they can. We spent nearly an hour talking about ordinary things instead of painful ones. She asked Jonathan about basketball, his favorite classes, and whether he still enjoyed building model airplanes. She already knew the answer because Willie had once mentioned it in one of his updates, but she wanted to hear Jonathan tell the story himself. Eventually, she looked back at me with a more serious expression. Jeffrey, there is one last thing I need you to have. She slowly reached toward the bedside drawer and removed a large cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax. She placed it in my hands, but did not let go immediately. Please promise me you will not open this until tomorrow morning. I nodded. I promise. She smiled with quiet relief before finally releasing the envelope. Then she looked directly into my eyes and said something that made my heart begin racing all over again. When you read what is inside, you will finally understand why I could never bring myself to tell you the entire truth in person. The next morning I woke before sunrise without needing an alarm. For several moments, I simply sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the cream-colored envelope resting on the kitchen table exactly where I had placed it the night before. I had honored my promise. No matter how many times I had walked past it after returning home from Tallahassee, I had never broken the seal. Jonathan quietly entered the kitchen a few minutes later, still wearing the same thoughtful expression he had carried since meeting Sherry. Are you going to open it now? He asked. I nodded slowly. Your grandmother wanted me to wait until this morning. He poured himself a glass of orange juice before sitting across from me without another word. I carefully broke the blue wax seal and unfolded several handwritten pages. A smaller folded document slipped onto the table along with the letter, but I left it untouched for the moment. I recognized Sherry's handwriting immediately. My dear Jeffrey, if you are reading this, then we were blessed with something I feared we might never receive. We had the chance to meet not as strangers connected by old court papers, but as mother and son. That alone makes me more grateful than these pages could ever express. I stopped for a second, already feeling my eyes grow wet again. I continued reading. There is one decision I made that may confuse you until I explain it. The money you received was never intended to erase the years we lost. No amount of money could accomplish that. I saved it because I wanted you to have choices that I could never give you when you were young. I wanted Jonathan to grow up with opportunities instead of constant worry. But there is something even more important than the trust. I glanced toward the smaller folded paper still lying beside the letter, wondering if it was connected. Sherry's words answered the question before I reached the next page. Inside this envelope, you will also find a document that has nothing to do with inheritance. It contains my final request, but it is only a request. You owe me nothing beyond the kindness you showed by walking into my room yesterday. I unfolded the second document. It was not a legal contract. It was a simple list of names. There were dozens of them, arranged in alphabetical order. Next to many names were handwritten notes. Looking for sister since 1989. Never located birth parents. Brother separated during adoption. Family still searching. I looked back at the letter. Many years before you were born, I volunteered with organizations that helped reconnect separated families. After I lost contact with you, I understood their pain in a way I never had before. Whenever my health allowed, I quietly supported those efforts. The trust one created contains more money than one family truly needs. I hope you will keep enough to build a comfortable future for yourself and Jonathan. But if your heart ever tells you the time is right, I hope you might consider using part of it to continue helping families find one another. If you choose differently, I will love you just the same. I lowered the pages into my lap. The room became completely quiet. Jonathan looked at the list of names. Who are they? He asked softly. People who lost someone important. He studied the paper for several moments before looking back at me. Kind of like Grandma lost you. I nodded. Yes. He traced one finger lightly down the page without touching the names. Do some of them still not know where their families are? It looks that way. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. If Grandma spent all those years hoping someone would help her, maybe we should help somebody else too. His words were simple, but they carried the same quiet wisdom that had surprised me throughout this entire journey. I realized that Sherry had never tried to buy forgiveness. She had tried to pass forward hope. Later that afternoon, Noelle arrived with several additional trust documents that required my signature before I could assume full control of the trust and authorize any future distributions. He patiently explained every page, every tax consideration, and every legal responsibility. There was no pressure to make immediate decisions. In fact, he encouraged me to wait several months before making any major financial commitments. I appreciated that advice because my life had already changed more in 24 hours than I could reasonably process. Before leaving, Noelle handed me one final folder. Sherry asked me to give you this after you finished reading her letter. Inside were detailed notes describing the charitable work she had quietly supported over the years, along with contact information for several nonprofit organizations dedicated to reconnecting separated relatives through legal records, genealogy research, and volunteer investigations. At the bottom of the final page, she had written one sentence in blue ink. Every family deserves at least one more chance. I folded the page carefully and slipped it back into the folder. That evening, Jonathan and I finally visited the apartment we had originally planned to rent. The landlord greeted us warmly and admitted that another applicant had offered to pay immediately, but he had kept his promise to hold the unit for us until the end of the week. I smiled and explained that life had taken an unexpected turn. As Jonathan excitedly measured where his desk would fit beside the bedroom window, I realized something remarkable. 24 hours earlier, I had believed my greatest responsibility was finding a better apartment. Now I was carrying the hopes of a mother who had spent decades believing broken families could still become whole. As the sun began setting outside the apartment window, my phone vibrated with a message from Noelle. It contained only one sentence. There is something Sherry never had the opportunity to tell you yesterday because she became too tired. Please come to the care facility tomorrow morning. She asked me to make certain you hear it in person. The following morning, Jonathan and I returned to the assisted living community just after breakfast. The same nurse greeted us with a gentle smile that carried both warmth and quiet understanding. She has been waiting for you, she said softly. She insisted on sitting by the window this morning. We walked down the familiar hallway, and this time my steps felt different. The fear that had followed me the day before had slowly given way to gratitude. I had not recovered 30 lost years, and I never would. But I had been given something I once believed was impossible. I had been given the chance to say hello before it became another goodbye. Sherry looked tired, but when she saw Jonathan and me enter the room, her face brightened exactly as it had the previous afternoon. You came back, she whispered. I promised I would, I answered as I gently took her hand again. Jonathan placed a small potted yellow flower on the windowsill. I thought your room could use something that keeps growing, he said. Sherry smiled. Thank you, sweetheart. That is a beautiful idea. We spent the next hour talking about ordinary memories instead of lost years. She wanted to hear about Jonathan's science projects, his favorite basketball player, and the apartment with the bedroom overlooking the baseball field. She laughed when Jonathan explained exactly where he planned to put his desk and how he intended to convince me to let him paint one wall blue. Listening to them together, I realized something remarkable. They were not trying to make up for decades they had missed. They were simply making the most of the minutes they had been given. Eventually, Sherry looked toward Noelle, who had quietly entered the room a few minutes earlier. He understood immediately and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. She turned back to me. There is one thing I could never write in a letter, she said. Some truths belong in a person's voice. I squeezed her hand gently. I am listening. She took a slow breath. For many years I blamed myself for losing you. Then I blamed your father. Then I blamed the courts. Carrying that much blame became exhausting. She paused before continuing. One day I realized that if I spent the rest of my life counting everything that had been taken from me, I would never notice the people who were still willing to help me. Willie reminded me of that. Noelle reminded me of that. Eventually, I understood that hope grows faster than bitterness when you give it somewhere to go. She smiled toward Jonathan. That is why I created the trust. Money can disappear. A kind choice can keep traveling long after we are gone. Tears filled my eyes again, but this time they came with peace instead of confusion. I cannot promise I will always make the right decisions, I admitted. I never expected perfection, she replied. I only hoped you would continue becoming the man I already knew you were. Jonathan quietly reached over and wrapped one arm around my shoulder. Sherry watched us with unmistakable contentment. Now I know I did not lose everything, she whispered. Those were the last long conversation we shared together. Over the next several days her strength gradually faded, but she remained comfortable, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her. Willie visited often. Noelle handled every practical detail with quiet professionalism. Jonathan insisted on reading one chapter from his favorite adventure novel every afternoon, because Sherry had told him she loved hearing children read. One peaceful evening, with soft music playing near the window and the yellow flower beginning to bloom, Sherry slipped away quietly. There were tears, of course, but there was also an unexpected sense of completion. She had not left the world wondering whether her son knew she loved him. I had not lost my mother twice. I had found her before saying goodbye. During the months that followed, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Jonathan and I moved into the apartment overlooking the baseball field just as we had planned. I continued working for the school district because I genuinely enjoyed the people there. The trust gave us financial security, but it did not change the values that had shaped our lives. Instead of leaving my job, I reduced my hours enough to volunteer with one of the family reunification organizations Sherry had supported for years. Noelle introduced me to experienced researchers who helped reconnect relatives through public records, genealogy, and patient investigation. Willie became one of our most dependable volunteers after retiring from driving the school bus. Watching him welcome frightened families with the same gentle smile he had shown Jonathan for years somehow felt perfectly natural. About 1 year later, we received a handwritten letter from a young woman in Missouri who had recently found her older brother after nearly 3 decades apart, through one of the programs our family now supported. She wrote that meeting him had not erased the years they lost, but it had given both of them a future they never thought possible. I placed that letter beside one of Sherry's old birthday letters inside the same cardboard box that had once waited so patiently for me. The two letters had been written by different people living completely different lives, yet together they seemed to answer the same quiet question. Sometimes love arrives too late to rewrite the past, but it can still change everything that comes after it. I still think about that ordinary Tuesday morning when I walked into a bank expecting nothing more than a routine withdrawal. I believed I was about to withdraw nearly all of my savings. I walked out carrying the first pieces of a family I thought had disappeared forever. Closing reflection. Perhaps the hardest part of any misunderstanding is not the moment it begins, but the years that quietly grow around it. Time has a way of turning assumptions into memories that feel permanent, even when they were never fully true. This story gently reminds us that kindness often works in ways we never notice while we are living through ordinary days. A conversation, a promise kept in silence, or a small act of care may never appear important in the moment, yet it can become part of someone else's strength years later. There are moments when life does not offer the chance to recover everything that was lost, but it sometimes offers enough to begin again with honesty, compassion, and gratitude. That beginning may not erase the past, yet it can still become one of the most meaningful chapters of all. I would truly enjoy hearing your thoughts after this journey. If you found yourself in Jeffrey's place, what decision would have mattered most to you? And what part of this story would have stayed in your heart the longest?